Levi was already 70 years old, and he had been living alone for the last few years. His life seemed like a dying flame, once full of warmth, joy and movement. Now it was filled with silence and memories of the past. Levi was a widower, and after the death of his wife Clara, the world around him seemed to fade. Her passing had left a void in his heart that nothing could fill. All the moments they had shared walking together, talking over a cup of coffee, family evenings with the children now seemed like distant memories that were getting further away every day. He lived in his house, which he and Clara had once bought as a newlywed couple, with plans to build their happy life there. At first, this house was full of laughter, screams of children, festive dinners and family evenings. But over time, the children grew up, went about their business, and the house slowly began to sink into silence. After Clara's death, this silence became almost unbearable. Every corner of the house reminded them of their favorite armchair by the window, her books on the shelf, a photo from their wedding day on the bedside table next to the bed. Levi often sat in this chair and just stared out the window, lost in memories. Levi's children, a son and a daughter, lived far away. They visited him only occasionally, on big holidays or when they had free time. Both were busy with their families and work, and Levi understood that. But he still felt abandoned. Previously, he was sure that in his old age he would be surrounded by grandchildren and he would spend his days in their company, watching them grow up. But the reality turned out to be different. On the rare days when the children came with their families, the house was filled with life again for a short time. But as soon as they left, the frightening silence returned again, and Levi was left alone with himself. Every morning started the same way. Levi woke up early, as he had long since lost the habit of sleeping for a long time. His day began with making himself breakfast: 1 egg, a piece of toast and coffee, as Clara did. He left her habits in his life, as if she were still around, and it seemed to him that by keeping these rituals, he was somehow keeping her memory alive. However, at breakfast, his thoughts always wandered somewhere far away. He recalled how he and Clara liked to discuss the news, joke or plan the day. Now it was just him at the table, and the conversations were only in his head. Levi rarely left the house. The walks that had once brought him pleasure now seemed pointless. In the park, where he and Clara liked to go, he saw young couples, families with children, and this only increased his feeling of loneliness. He felt that his world was moving too fast, and he himself was stuck in the past, where Clara was still there, where they were still together. One day, sitting by the window and looking out at the empty street, Levi found himself thinking that he had almost given up hope for change. His life seemed to be completing its journey, slowly fading away. Each new day was similar to the previous one, and nothing foreshadowed that this would change. But inside Levi, there was still a faint spark of desire for something more, maybe just company, maybe just communication. But he didn't know where it could have come from. On one of those grey days, Levi received a call from his daughter.
"Hi, honey. Nazi."
His voice sounded calm, but there was a longing in it.
"Hi, Dad. How are you?"
She always tried to be caring, but Levi knew she didn't have enough time for long conversations.
"Everything is as usual. Nothing new."
He didn't complain, although she could sense his loneliness. Conversations with children were always short, as if they were afraid to hear something too sad or heavy. They tried not to get involved in long discussions about his life, thinking that this way it would be easier for him to cope with the loss. But this only increased his sense of isolation from the world. After the conversation, Levi thought about his life again. He was aware that his children loved him, but everyone had their own lives, and although he understood this, it didn't make loneliness any less painful. He spent his days in this state, until one day something happened that he did not expect. An unexpected figure appeared in his life, a young girl who turned his world upside down. It happened on one of his rare trips to the store. Levi always shopped at the same supermarket, where everyone knew him as a regular customer. He was used to the fact that his day was clearly scheduled: breakfast, a walk to the store, dinner alone, and a night spent in front of the TV. But this time, something went differently. In the queue at the checkout, Levi met Sandra, a young, cheerful girl who seemed to him a bright spot in his grey everyday life. She smiled at the cashier, said something cheerfully, and attracted attention with her energy. Levi noticed her by accident, but couldn't look away. Her lightness and confidence made him forget about his moping for a moment. She was young and full of life, and he felt old and disconnected from the world. But when she turned around and looked him straight in the eye, something inside Levi trembled. She didn't look away, but smiled at him. And that simple smile did something incredible. It made him feel like he still existed for someone to notice him. Sandra started the conversation first, telling him a few kind words about the weather or how hard it was to wait in line. Levi didn't immediately realize what was going on, but he answered her, and the conversation somehow started by itself. It was unexpected for Levi. He had lived in the shadows for so many years, avoiding communication, but this young girl was so natural and friendly that he felt his heart, long chained to loneliness, open up a little. Their brief conversation continued for a few more minutes while they stood in line, but Levi couldn't get it out of his head. When he returned home, he kept thinking about Sandra and how her simple smile made him feel alive. At that moment, he realized that his life might not be over yet, that maybe he still has a chance to experience something new, something important. The next day, when Levi went to the store again, he met Sandra again. This time she approached him first, and their conversation became a little longer. Levi was surprised at how easy it was for him to communicate with her. She was young, but she didn't pay attention to the age difference. She was interested in what he was saying, and she readily shared her thoughts and stories. So began their unexpected friendship, which soon turned into something much more. Sandra became a frequent guest in Levi's life, and every day he felt his heart begin to beat faster again, as his days filled with meaning. Levi has always led a calm, measured life. After his wife's death, his days were monotonous: a walk to the store, rare calls from the children, and long hours of solitude. But one day everything changed when he met Sandra. It was an ordinary day. Levi went to the grocery store, not expecting anything unusual. He slowly wandered through the aisles, picking up the usual products: bread, milk, some vegetables. The familiar faces of cashiers and customers flashed before him, but he didn't pay attention to it. And suddenly, when Levi was standing in line at the checkout, he heard a ringing, cheerful laugh. He turned around and saw her, a young, energetic woman of about 25. Sandra was dressed in a bright summer outfit. Her long hair shone under the light of the lamps, and her eyes shone with joy of life. She laughed easily and chatted with the cashier, making his day clearly more enjoyable. But something about this girl hooked Levi. Maybe it was her energy, contrasting so strongly with his own fading life. She met his gaze and, to his surprise, smiled broadly. Levi was confused, but feeling a certain warm wave from her smile, he also smiled slightly in response. Sandra seemed to be a person who made acquaintance easily and was not afraid to approach first. When she walked away from the cash register, and to Levi's surprise, walked straight towards him, his heart suddenly began to beat faster.
Hello. I've already seen you here a couple of times. You probably live nearby.
Her voice was full of enthusiasm, and Levi hesitated for a moment, not used to such open treatment from complete strangers.
Yes, I live not far from here. For many years now.
His voice was quiet and calm, contrasting with her energy. He was a little nervous, not knowing what to say next. But Sandra didn't seem to notice his awkwardness.
My name is Sandra. And you?
Levi. She held out her hand, and he shook it lightly, feeling the unexpected warmth and friendliness radiating from her.
It's great to meet someone who's been here a long time. I haven't been here long, I don't know everything yet.
Levi nodded, still surprised at her openness. He was not used to such acquaintances, especially with young people. But Sandra continued to talk to him as if they had known each other all their lives. She said that she had recently moved to the area from another city and was currently settling in a new place. Levi listened as she shared stories about her life and felt her energy begin to penetrate his world. After this conversation, Levi returned home, not stopping to think about meeting Sandra. Her energy, her lightness and joy of life were like a breath of fresh air to him. He felt as if this short conversation had awakened something forgotten in him, something that had long been buried under the weight of memories and loneliness. The next day, Levi went to the store again, although he didn't have a special need. Subconsciously, he hoped to see Sandra again, and his wish came true. She was standing at the fruit stand, cheerfully discussing with the seller which apples to choose. Levi couldn't help but smile at the ease with which she interacted with others. When she noticed him, her face lit up with a familiar smile, and she waved at him.
Levi, how are you doing?
Levi hesitated slightly, not used to such spontaneity, but her enthusiasm was contagious.
It's okay. And you? How are you settling in?
Oh, slowly. The people here are so friendly. I didn't even expect it. I found some great apples today. Do you want to try it?
She handed him one of the apples, and Levi smiled and took it. At that moment, he realized that he had not felt such ease in communication for a long time. Sandra was like a ray of light, and her positivity infected him. They talked a little more, and Sandra suggested that they walk to the park together. Levi was a little embarrassed, but agreed. They found a bench in the park and continued their conversation. Levi couldn't stop being surprised at how easy it was for him to communicate with her. Despite their age difference, he didn't feel like an old man next to her. She treated him as an equal, respecting his experience and wisdom, but at the same time not emphasizing their differences. During the conversation, Sandra talked a lot about herself, about how she moved to this city to start a new life, about her work in a small company, and how she was always looking for someone to talk to in a simple and human way. Levi listened, and the more he learned about her, the more he realized how much they had in common, despite the years that separated them. Sandra, in turn, found something special about Levi. His calmness, his deep outlook on life, and his ability to listen attracted her. She understood that there was a hidden wisdom of life in him, which is rarely found in young people. Levi told her about his past, about his life with Clara, about how he copes with loneliness. Sandra listened attentively, and a special bond developed between them. A few weeks passed, and Levi and Sandra began to meet more often. They walked around the park, sat on benches and talked for hours. Sandra found in Levi someone with whom she could share not only joy, but also emotions. She shared her fears and doubts with him, and his calmness helped her cope with life's difficulties. Levi, on the other hand, felt his heart come alive every day. It had been a long time since he had felt such an interest in life as he did now, with Sandra by his side. Their friendship grew stronger and stronger. Levi often found himself looking forward to these meetings. He liked listening to her stories, watching her cheerfulness and energy. Sandra brought to his world what he had been missing for a long time, a feeling of warmth and intimacy. He felt that someone needed him again, that his experience and thoughts were important to someone. One day, when they were sitting on the same park bench, Sandra suddenly looked at Levi with special warmth.
You know, Levi, I'm glad we met. Sometimes it seems to me that such meetings are not accidental.
Levi was a little embarrassed, but his heart trembled at these words. I'm glad too, Sandra. You have given me back the feeling that there is still room for joy in life. She smiled, and at that moment Levi realized that their friendship had grown into something more. There was a deep emotional connection between them that could not be ignored. Despite their age difference, they found in each other what everyone was looking for. Levi found comfort and warmth, and Sandra found wisdom and support. This is how their amazing story began, where two people, separated for decades, found in each other what made their lives complete and meaningful. Their friendship, which began with simple walks and conversations, gradually began to take on new forms. Every day spent together brought them closer to each other, and soon Levi and Sandra began to feel that their bond was no longer limited to just warm friendships. They both knew that something much deeper was going on between them. Levi lived in silence and solitude for a long time, almost losing hope that something bright and significant might appear in his life again. He came to terms with the idea that after Clara's death, he was no longer destined to experience strong emotions or intimacy with anyone else. But with the advent of Sandra, something began to change in his life. Her presence seemed to enliven his inner world, awakening those feelings that he thought had long since died out. Every meeting with Sandra brought Levi joy that he had not experienced for a long time. Their conversations became more personal and confidential. He began to share with her his memories, the pain of loss, thoughts about the future, which he once considered empty. Sandra listened to him attentively, realizing that Levi was not just an old man, but a man with a deep soul and rich life experience. She admired his wisdom, his ability to put things in perspective, and the calmness he radiated. Sandra, in turn, found in Levi what she lacked in her surroundings. The young people she dated seemed shallow and selfish to her. She has always been attracted to maturity, and Levi has become the epitome of reliability and stability for her. He was not subject to whims and sudden mood swings like her peers. Instead, he was constant and predictable, which was an unexpected source of peace for Sandra. Their relationship began to change gradually, but this change was undeniable. Levi noticed how Sandra began to touch his hand more and more often during a conversation, or how her gaze became a little longer than it was before. He began to feel that his feelings for her were already more than just sympathy. It was something that made his heart beat faster again. Sandra was also aware that her affection for Levi went beyond simple friendship. He became not only a friend to her, but also someone who understood her more deeply than anyone else. Levi did not criticize her, did not evaluate her, but simply accepted her for who she was. This acceptance and respect was something new to her, something she hadn't found in her previous life. One day, when they were sitting on their favorite bench in the park again, Levi suddenly realized that he could no longer hide his feelings. Sandra talked about her day, but he hardly listened. All his thoughts were focused on her smile, on the way her hair was blowing in the wind. He realized that he had fallen in love with her. Despite the huge age difference, despite the fears and doubts that both of them might have had, this feeling was strong and real. Their first kiss was quiet and gentle. It happened almost by accident, but when their lips met, Levi felt everything inside him change. It wasn't just a physical act, it was a moment when their hearts recognized each other. They both realized that their relationship had become something more than they had originally imagined. It wasn't just an impulse or an accidental passion, it was something deeper, more serious. Sandra, despite her youth, was aware of the seriousness of their relationship. She understood that Levi could not offer her what young men could offer. He had no promising future, and their time together was limited by his age. But she knew that she had found something in him that she had not been able to find in others. Levi gave her a sense of security and the love she had been looking for a long time. She was not afraid of the age difference, because she saw not the years behind it, but a soul that understood her. Levi, in turn, felt a new surge of energy. He no longer felt like an old man, as he had before meeting Sandra. Her presence rejuvenated him, gave him new strength and goals. He no longer thought of his life as complete. On the contrary, it seemed to him that he was starting a new stage. Every day with Sandra was filled with meaning, and he was looking forward to their meetings. Their relationship was an unexpected source of happiness for both of them. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't discuss what would happen in a year or two. They lived here and now, enjoying every moment they spent together. Levi felt happy, as he had not been happy for many years. He had regained something he had not expected to find: love, which came to him at a moment when he had already lost all hope. Sandra continued to live her life, but now Levi was in it, and it made her days brighter. She shared her plans with him, her dreams, and he listened attentively, sometimes advising, but more often just supporting her. She saw in him not only an old man, but also a man who could give her what she needed so much: the confidence that she was loved and valued. Their relationship became a real island of happiness in a world that seemed to be too violent and fast for Levi, and too fussy for Sandra. They found solace in each other, and that made their bond special. Levi knew his time was limited, but he didn't regret anything. He was happy that love had appeared in his life again, and that he was able to give this feeling to Sandra, who in turn brought him back to life. Their romance soon became an integral part of both of them. Levi could no longer imagine his days without Sandra, and Sandra found in Levi the support and tenderness that she lacked among her peers. They didn't hide their feelings, but they didn't make them obvious either. Their relationship was something personal, intimate, something they valued more than anything else in the world. The time spent together was a gift for both of them. Levi felt the taste of life again, and Sandra, despite her youth, understood that love knows no age limits. Their romance was tender and sincere, without unnecessary expectations and demands. They both knew that they had found something special in each other, and it made their lives brighter and richer. Levi could feel the fire burning inside him again. He no longer thought about the past with bitterness. Now his memories were filled not only with losses, but also with new joys. Every meeting with Sandra was a celebration for him. Every laugh of hers was a melody that made his days brighter. Their relationship was an unexpected turn of fate for both of them, which brought not only love into their lives, but also the realization that happiness can be found even in the most unexpected places. A few months later, when the relationship between Levi and Sandra grew into something more serious and deep, they decided to get married. It was an unusual decision for both of them, but neither Levi nor Sandra felt anything strange about it. Their feelings were sincere, and the desire to be together became stronger every day. They understood that their relationship was not an accident, and that fate brought them together not just for a short-term romance, but in order to give each other real happiness. The wedding was something unexpected for Levi. At the age of 70, he had not thought for a long time that he would ever stand in front of the altar again. His marriage to Clara was long and happy, but after her death, he no longer imagined that he could find the strength or desire to marry again. But with the advent of Sandra, everything changed. He felt alive and needed again. And this desire to be with her for the rest of his life became an important incentive for him to live. Sandra, despite her youth, did not feel any doubts about her decision. She was attracted to Levi's maturity, his calmness and ability to appreciate life. She saw in him not only a reliable partner, but also someone who could become a real support for her. Despite the huge age difference, she knew she wanted to be with him. Many of her friends and acquaintances did not understand this choice, but Sandra was confident in herself. She had always been an unusual girl, and her decision to marry Levi seemed right to her. Their decision about the wedding came unexpectedly. One evening, when they were sitting on the porch of Levi's house and discussing life, their conversation naturally turned to the topic of the future. At first, it was just thinking what will happen in a year, how they will live together, what changes await them. Levi, despite his years, could not hide his excitement and joy when discussing these plans. For him, the thought of the future became not only possible, but also desirable. Sandra also talked about how she would like to connect her life with him, how she sees their years together. She had no illusions. She was well aware that Levi was much older than her, and that their life together would not be long. But what was more important to her was that they could spend these years together, enjoying every moment. She understood that their love was rare, and she did not want to miss the chance to be happy here and now. When Levi asked her to marry him, it was not a carefully prepared proposal. It happened spontaneously, almost by accident. But when he said those words, he realized that he really wanted this. He wanted to see Sandra next to him not only now, but also in the future. He looked at her expectantly, but at the same time with an inner certainty that she would say yes. Sandra, smiling, agreed, and this moment became something special for both of them. Now their love took on a new form that connected them on a deeper level. Preparing for the wedding was both an exciting and emotional time for them. Levi never thought that he would find himself in this situation again, planning a wedding in his 70s. He felt that fate had given him a second chance at happiness, and it was a real miracle for him. In his old age, he found what he had long considered lost love and the meaning of life. Sandra, despite her youth, approached the preparation with all seriousness. She was happy to plan the details of the celebration, discussed with Levi who they would invite, what the ceremony would look like. They both did not want a lavish wedding, they just needed a small event with close people where they could share their happiness. Sandra offered ideas for a small cozy holiday, and Levi, although he didn't know much about such things, was happy to agree to anything that made her happy. Despite his age, Levi felt the energy of youth in himself again. The preparations for the wedding filled his life with meaning and joy. He hadn't been this excited and enthusiastic in a long time. Every day brought new emotions, from choosing a costume to discussing music for the ceremony. He began to feel again that his life was not over, that there were new moments of happiness ahead of him, which he could not even imagine. Their relationship became even stronger during this period. Levi and Sandra spent a lot of time together, discussing not only the wedding, but also how they would live on. They talked about home, how they would spend their days, and even how they would travel, although Levi wasn't sure if he had the strength to do so. Sandra inspired him to dream dreams that he had long ago stopped allowing himself. She talked about the importance of continuing to live life to the fullest, despite her age, and Levi, looking at her, agreed. However, despite the joy of preparation, Levi sometimes thought about the future with slight anxiety. He understood that his time was limited, and that they would not be able to be together as long as they would like. But Sandra always reminded him that the main thing is what they have now, and that they should enjoy every moment without thinking about what will happen in many years. Her optimism and faith in the present helped Levi cope with these thoughts. Wedding preparations also faced some difficulties. Levi was worried about how his children would react to their union. He wasn't sure if they would understand his decision to marry a much younger woman. He knew that it might seem strange or even wrong to them. Sandra was also worried about how her family and friends would accept this union, but she was confident in her feelings and knew that she could not change her desires for the sake of someone else's approval. One day Levi decided to talk to his son about his decision. This conversation was very important to him, as he did not want his children to feel distant or betrayed. When he told his son about his plans, he was stunned at first, but then, seeing how happy Levi was, he realized that this was not just a whim. His father was really happy, and that was the most important thing. As a result, Levi's son supported him, although not immediately. Such conversations were difficult, but Levi understood that it was necessary for his family to accept Sandra and their joint decision. Sandra, in turn, also talked to her loved ones. It was difficult for some of her friends to understand how she could fall in love with a man who was much older than her. But Sandra was confident in herself and in Levi. She knew that their love was real, and that she didn't have to explain her feelings to anyone. Her parents were also surprised, but as in the case of Levi, they saw that their daughter was happy, and this was the main thing for them. When all the preparations were completed and the wedding date was set, Levi felt really happy. He did not think that he would experience such feelings again in his life. It was a new chapter for him that he hadn't expected. His life has regained meaning, and every day has become filled with joy and expectation. He knew that their union would be special, and that their love, despite all the difficulties, would be a source of happiness and strength for them. Sandra and Levi have become a real team, preparing for the wedding. They supported each other in every decision, in every step, and this further strengthened their relationship. Their wedding was not just a celebration, it was a symbol of their love and loyalty to each other. A symbol that love can come at any age and change lives in the most unexpected way. A few days before the wedding, when everything was ready for their small but significant celebration, something happened that Levi could not even imagine. It all started completely unexpectedly. Sandra, always energetic and full of life, suddenly felt slightly unwell. At first it seemed insignificant, a little fatigue, which she attributed to the stressful days of preparing for the wedding. Levi noticed that she looked a little less cheerful, but they both took it calmly, thinking that just enough rest and everything would pass. On the day Sandra first felt weak, they decided to cancel a meeting with friends and spend time at home. Levi cooked dinner and Sandra wrapped herself in a blanket, looking a little tired, but smiling anyway. They spent the evening talking about the upcoming event, recalling the funny moments that had happened in recent months. It was a warm, calm night, and Levi had no idea that it would be the last such night for both of them. The next morning, Sandra woke up with a severe headache and a feeling of nausea. Levi, seeing how ill she was, immediately offered to call a doctor, but Sandra insisted that it was just a migraine and that she would recover soon. She didn't want anything to disrupt their plans, especially at such an important moment before the wedding. But Levi was still worried and convinced her to at least get some rest. He thought that a few hours of sleep would help her regain her strength. The day went on as usual, but by evening Sandra's condition worsened. Levi could no longer hide his concern. Sandra turned pale, her voice sounded weak, and she could barely get out of bed. At that moment, Levi realized that the matter was more serious than they both thought. He immediately called an ambulance, despite her feeble attempts to convince him that everything was fine. When Sandra was taken to the hospital, Levi was with her. Doctors quickly began to examine her, but so far no one could give an accurate answer to the question of what was happening to her. Levi stood in the hospital hallway, feeling his world begin to crumble. It was as if a shadow of the past had returned to him, the same worries, the same fears that he had felt when his wife Clara suddenly fell ill many years ago. He couldn't believe that something like this could happen again, but the fear was getting worse by the hour. Levi spent long hours in the hospital waiting for news. His thoughts were racing from one to the other. He remembered every moment he spent with Sandra, her laughter, her gentle touches. He could not imagine that this woman, who had recently filled his life with light and happiness, could so suddenly find herself on the brink. Every time the doctors passed by, he caught their glances in the hope of hearing something encouraging, but they all avoided speaking directly, only promising to do their best. As the days passed, Levi did not leave Sandra's hospital room. He sat next to her bed, held her hand when she could afford it, and told her about how they would get married soon, how everything would be fine. Sandra was too weak to answer, but her eyes showed that she understood him. They both knew that the situation was getting worse, but neither wanted to say it out loud. One night, when Levi, exhausted, dozed off on a chair next to the bed, he was awakened by Sandra's weak movements. She was trying to say something, but her voice was almost inaudible. Levi bent over her, trying to catch her words. She whispered softly that she loved him, and that she was happy with him. These words pierced his heart. Levi fought back tears, trying to be strong for her. But the next morning she was gone. Levi couldn't believe what had happened. His world collapsed again in an instant when the doctors announced that Sandra had passed away. They said that her body could not cope with the sudden illness, that it was a rare and aggressive disease that was rapidly progressing. No words from the doctors could explain to Levi how this could happen. How could this cheerful, energetic girl, who had just discussed their future together with him, leave his world so suddenly? Grief overwhelmed Levi. He couldn't believe that his happiness, which seemed so real and close, was cut short in an instant. The whole world around him turned grey and empty. All their plans, dreams, preparations for the wedding, it all seemed pointless now. He couldn't understand how such an injustice could happen. Levi felt like he was sinking back into the same abyss of loneliness that Sandra had pulled him out of just a few months ago. The house, which had been filled with joy only a short time ago, has now become a place of unbearable silence. Levi saw Sandra in every corner, her smile, her voice, her touch. All the things they had bought for the wedding now seemed like a reminder to him of what he had lost. There were traces of her presence everywhere in the house: her clothes, her perfume, her photographs, and this only increased his pain. Levi didn't know how to deal with such grief. He had lost not only the woman he loved, but also the hope for the future that she had given him. He felt overwhelmed, and the days passed in a muddy pain, filled with sleepless nights and empty days. No one could comfort him, and even the children who came to support him did not know how to help. They themselves were shocked by what had happened and saw that their father was once again in deep despair. Levi often sat in an armchair on the veranda, where he and Sandra spent so much time. He recalled every moment he spent with her and couldn't understand how things could have changed so quickly. They were preparing for the wedding, making plans for the future, dreaming about how they would live together, and now all these dreams disappeared in an instant. It was hard for him to realize that Sandra was gone. Her death seemed unreal to him, like a terrible dream from which he was about to wake up. He kept seeing her in his thoughts, hearing her voice, and it only made his suffering worse. He asked himself questions. Why did this happen? Why now, when his life seemed to have found a new meaning? Levi felt lost. He no longer knew how to move on. Sandra had given him hope for a new life, for happiness that he no longer expected to find, and now that hope was dashed. He couldn't figure out how to continue living without her. Everything that mattered had gone with her, and now his life was plunged back into darkness and loneliness. His soul was full of grief, and Levi didn't know how to deal with it. He was alone again, and this time the loss seemed even more unbearable because it happened so suddenly, so suddenly. Sandra was his light, his salvation, and now that light has gone out. After Sandra's death, Levi's life plunged back into that painful silence that had once been his constant companion. The house, which had recently been filled with her laughter and vitality, became silent and empty again. Every corner of this house was a reminder that he and Sandra planned to spend a lot more time together. The things they had bought for the wedding stood like the ghosts of unfulfilled dreams. All this plunged Levi into deep sadness, and he felt that he had lost not only the woman he loved, but also the joy of life that she had returned to him. Levi didn't know how to move on with his life. He was alone with his thoughts and memories again, as he had been after Clara's death. But this time the pain was different. They had lived with Clara for many years, and Levi was already ready for their time together to end one day. But with Sandra it was different. Their relationship was a bright and unexpected burst of happiness that flared up so suddenly and just as unexpectedly faded away. They did not have time to fulfill even part of their plans, did not have time to get married and build their new life. This made the loss even more unbearable. Levi often sat on the veranda of his house, where he and Sandra spent so much time together. He listened to the sounds of nature, which once brought him peace, but now seemed empty and meaningless. His thoughts kept returning to her. He remembered their first meeting at the store, their walks in the park, her gentle touch, her voice. It all seemed so real to him that he sometimes forgot that she was gone. But then reality rolled over him again, leaving a void and pain in its wake. A few weeks after her death, Levi began to notice that his grief, although it did not recede, began to change. Instead of feeling her loss as an endless abyss, he began to realize that Sandra had left not only pain in his life, but also a bright trace. Despite the tragedy of their story, Levi began to realize that these months spent with her were some of the happiest moments of his life. Their brief romance reminded him that even in old age, life can bring unexpected gifts, and that love has no age. Levi reflected on how meeting Sandra had changed him. Before her, he believed that his life was almost complete, that only a slow decline awaited him ahead. But Sandra gave him back meaning, awakened in him those feelings that he had long considered lost. She showed him that life can still be full of joy if you allow yourself to feel it. Even if their time together was short, this time was filled with true happiness. Sometimes Levi wondered why fate had brought them together if they had to break up so quickly. These thoughts haunted him, and he often wondered if their affair was an accident or something predetermined. He began to view his life as a chain of events, where every encounter and every loss had its own meaning. He couldn't find answers to all his questions, but every day he came to realize more and more that Sandra had come into his life for a reason. Her appearance and their short-term love gave him a new outlook on life, which helped him cope with grief. Levi began to notice that his memories of Sandra no longer caused him such unbearable pain as before. Now, when he remembered her, his heart was filled with warmth. Of course, it was still hard for him, and he often cried sitting on the same veranda, where they laughed and talked. But now there was something bright in those memories. He understood that their relationship, even if it was short, was real, and this realization brought him comfort. Levi began to realize that even short-term love can leave an indelible mark on a person's life. Over time, Levi thought more and more about the meaning of love and life. He saw that many people consider love to be something that lasts a lifetime. But his story with Sandra showed him that true love can be short-lived. It doesn't have to last for decades to be meaningful. Even if their affair lasted only a few months, it changed his life forever. Levi began to appreciate not the amount of time spent together, but the quality of these moments. He was aware that Sandra had left something more in his life than just memories. She gave him the opportunity to feel alive again, gave him hope that he had long lost. Their love, despite the tragic end, showed him that life can be wonderful, even in the most unexpected moments. Levi began to accept his loss not as punishment or injustice, but as part of his life journey, which led him to new discoveries about himself. More and more, Levi began to see that Sandra's death should not be the end of his happiness. Yes, he had lost her, but that did not mean that her influence on his life had disappeared. On the contrary, it has become even stronger. Levi realized that he had to continue to live with the light that she had left in his soul. He began to spend more time outdoors, walking around the places they loved to visit together. He found solace in these walks, and although it hurt him to realize that Sandra was no longer around, he felt that her spirit would always be with him. Levi also began to communicate more with his children and grandchildren. Previously, he avoided talking about Sandra, believing that it would be too hard for him. But now he started sharing his memories of her with them, telling them how she changed his life. These conversations helped him not only to cope with the loss, but also to realize that Sandra was still alive in his heart and in his stories. His children, seeing how much she influenced their father, also began to appreciate her contribution to his life. Every day Levi realized more and more that life goes on. Yes, she is not always fair, and sometimes she teaches the most unexpected and painful lessons. But Levi now knew that even after the most severe losses, one can find the strength to continue living. He began to restore his daily routine, returned to his habits, but with a new outlook on life. He no longer felt like the old man who once decided that his life was over. Sandra helped him realize that it's never too late to open his heart to love, and that even the shortest moments of happiness can leave a mark on a lifetime. A few years had passed since Sandra's death, and Levi was no longer the same person he had been before they met. She had left a deep imprint on his soul, and now he could look at his life with gratitude. He was no longer afraid of loneliness. because he knew that there would always be a place in his heart for those he loved. Sandra was one of them, and her memory will always remain with him. Levi learned to live with this bright feeling, realizing that his story with Sandra is not just a story of loss, but a story about how even short-term love can change a person forever. And even though she was no longer around, Levi knew that she would always be a part of his life, a part of his heart.